Remy Ma is one of the most gifted female rappers to ever touch a microphone in New York City, and yet somehow, her entire career, her freedom, her reputation, and nearly a decade of her life all got detonated over an amount of money that a mid-tier influencer today spends on a single handbag. $3,000. $3,000. That is the number, allegedly, that stood between one of hip-hop's brightest female stars and a completely different life, because on the night of July 14, 2007, in the meatpacking district of Manhattan, a single gunshot rang out outside a nightclub called Pizza Bar, and everything Remy Ma had built alongside Big Pun and Fat Joe, every bar, every award, every record-breaking anthem, was suddenly hanging by a thread that even her best defense attorneys reportedly could not hold together. And now let me tell you what the headlines won't, because that's where the real story lives. Because on the surface, this looks like just another rap star gone wrong, another Bronx kid who couldn't outrun the streets, another cautionary tale you scroll past on your feed. But when you actually pull back the curtain on what allegedly happened that night, what led up to it, who was in that Cadillac Escalade that fled the scene, why the wedding to Papoose reportedly got shut down in a jail visiting room over a smuggled handcuff key, and how a woman convicted of shooting her own friend somehow, against every single odd stacked against her, clawed her way back to a Grammy nomination, you start to realize this isn't a hip-hop story. This is a Shakespearean tragedy with a Bronx accent. This is loyalty, betrayal, mentorship, grief, and the kind of split-second decision that follows a person for the rest of their natural life. And the most disturbing part, the part that has fans still arguing in comment sections almost 20 years later, is that Remy Smith, the same woman who was once handpicked by Big Pun himself out of a Bronx grocery store parking lot, the same woman who outrapped grown men before she could legally vote, the same woman who wrote her first song at 13 years old about suicide because her home life was so heavy, that woman allegedly pulled the trigger. And whether it was on purpose, or an accident like she claims, or a moment of pure human rage that she'll never be able to take back, one thing everybody in that courtroom agreed on, after that night, Remy Ma was never going to be the same person again. So buckle up, because we are going all the way in. Now everybody thinks they know this story. They think they know it because they saw the 10-second clip. They saw the mugshot. They heard Fat Joe mention her name on a red carpet. They heard all the way up on the radio in 2016 and thought, oh, she's back, good for her. But that surface-level version of events, that TMZ headline version, that rapper goes to prison, rapper comes home version, that is a paper-thin cartoon of what actually went down. Because the Remy Ma story is not a story about a shooting. It's a story about everything that had to happen for that shooting to even be possible. And once you understand the full timeline, once you understand the pressure cooker she was living in, once you understand the industry she was trying to survive in as a female MC in the mid-2000s, you start to see this whole thing with completely different eyes. Because here's what most of the coverage back in 2007 completely skipped over. Remy Ma, born Reminisce Kiana Smith on May 30, 1980, in the Bronx, did not have the childhood most artists get to romanticize on their debut album. She grew up in the Castle Hill Projects, one of the harshest environments in New York City during one of the roughest eras that borough has ever seen. Her mother was reportedly incarcerated for a period of her upbringing. Her biological father, according to her own accounts, did not reappear in her life until she was 18 years old. And in the home she did grow up in, she was allegedly surrounded by drug abuse from family members while being expected to essentially raise her own younger siblings. She was a child playing the role of a parent, and she was doing it while trying to stay an honor student. Let that sink in for a second. So when you hear the origin story of a 13-year-old girl writing her very first song, and that song is titled Suicide, and the lyrics allegedly include lines like, "Do you think about dying?" and "Why would you take your own life?" That is not a shock value creative choice. That is a child using pen and paper as the only escape hatch available to her. That is a kid who found language before she found safety. And when you understand that, when you actually sit with that image of a young girl in Castle Hill turning her pain into poetry because there was nowhere else for it to go, you start to understand why rap wasn't a hobby for Remy Smith. It was a survival mechanism. It was oxygen. And that's the person we need to be talking about, not the mugshot, not the headlines, not the punchline. The kid. The kid who wrote her way out. By the time she hit her teenage years, she was battling grown men in Bronx ciphers and folding them in half. Her name started buzzing in the streets, but she reportedly never actually believed rap could become a career. To her, this was just something she did because she was good at it and because it made her feel alive. Then, at 17 years old, one afternoon, in a completely random, almost movie-scripted moment, everything changed. She bumped into one of Big Pun's friends outside a Bronx grocery store, and this friend, knowing what she could do on a microphone, told her Pun lived right around the corner and needed to hear her. And what happens next is one of the most quietly legendary moments in hip-hop history that almost nobody outside of the culture ever talks about. Because that grocery store encounter was the door. And Remy Ma walked through it. Let's break this down piece by piece, because every detail matters. Remy, being 17 and being smart enough to know that walking into a strange man's apartment alone was not the move, allegedly brought her mother with her to meet Big Pun. And when she got there, the scene was, by her own retelling in later interviews, absolutely surreal. Big Pun, one of the most feared lyricists in all of hip-hop, was reportedly laying on a mattress in nothing but boxer shorts, getting a massage, and he looked over at this teenage girl, smiled, and said the 6 words that would change her entire life. "I hear you can rap." And without hesitation, without asking for a beat, without warming up, Remy dropped a 24-bar verse right there in that apartment. Cold. From memory. And Pun listened all the way through, and then he asked her the one question that told him everything he needed to know about her. He asked her, "Did you write those yourself?" And Remy, to her credit, was insulted. She reportedly said she thought it was the dumbest question on earth. "What do you mean, who wrote them?" And Big Pun had to sit her down and explain that in that era, and honestly still today, several prominent female rappers relied heavily on ghostwriters. He played her a couple of reference tracks to prove it. And Remy's reaction, her exact quote, was, "I just felt like it was cheating." And that, right there, that was the audition. That was the moment Pun knew. Because in one afternoon, this teenager had shown him not only that she could wrap circles around grown men, but that she had the one thing you cannot teach an artist, integrity about the craft. She wrote her own bars, and she was offended that anyone would assume she didn't. Pun asked for her number, said he'd call the next day, and unlike almost every promise ever made in the music industry, he actually did. Now let me tell you what the headlines won't, because that's where the real story lives. The very next day, Big Pun pulled up outside her apartment building and told her to come downstairs. When she got in the car, he asked her, "And this is real, can you braid hair?" She was confused. He laughed and said, "All black girls know how to braid, get in the car." And that day, that literal day, she rode with him to a music video shoot that turned out to be with Big Pun himself, Fat Joe, and Jennifer Lopez. This teenage girl from Castle Hill, less than 24 hours after rapping in a stranger's apartment, was now on set with 3 of the most influential figures in Latin and hip-hop culture at that time. That is not luck. That is Big Pun seeing greatness and moving on it immediately. And observers of that era have always said the same thing, Pun didn't just want a protege. He wanted an heir. For the next several months, Remy was in the studio with Pun almost every single day while he recorded his second album, Yeah Baby. And Pun's teaching method was aggressive and it was constant. Producer LV later recalled that whenever anyone new walked into the studio, Pun would point at Remy and just say one word, rap. No warm-up. No context. No excuses. And she never flinched. Every session was a masterclass. She reportedly learned song structure, concept development, the importance of a chorus, and how to build a record from the ground up. LV put it perfectly in a later interview. He said, "If you're smart, you soak up all that knowledge," and Remy did that every single day. By the time she got on a record, she knew exactly what to do. Pun's plan was clear. He was going to introduce her to the world. But he never got the chance. On February 7, 2000, just 2 months before Yeah Baby was set to release, Big Pun died. He suffered respiratory failure and a heart attack. He was 28 years old. And for the hip-hop world, it was one of those losses where an entire generation of fans felt the wind get knocked out of them. But for Remy, this wasn't just the death of one of the greatest lyricists to ever live. This was the loss of the man who saw her when nobody else did. The man who pulled her out of the Bronx and put her in the studio. The man who was going to hand her the microphone in front of the whole world. And she had to keep going without him. When Yeah Baby finally dropped that April, it introduced the world to a young MC then going by Remy Martin, appearing on tracks like Ms. Martin and You Was Wrong. Pun's plan, even in death, worked. People noticed her. They couldn't not notice her. And this is where Fat Joe steps in. Fat Joe, being Pun's closest brother in the game, essentially inherits the responsibility of Pun's protege. He signs Remy to his imprint under SRC and Universal Records, and he makes her a full member of Terror Squad. And for the next few years, she does exactly what Pun trained her to do. She grinds. She works with Busta Rhymes. She works with Noriega. She works with R. Kelly. She keeps battling other MCs. She stays sharp. And then, on July 27, 2004, Terror Squad releases their second album, True Story, and one record on that album detonates in the middle of American pop culture like a bomb. Lean Back. That song is not just a hit. That song is a movement. That song lives on radio stations, in nightclubs, at cookouts, at high school proms, at wedding receptions, in every single crevice of American life for over a year straight. And Remy's verse on it, the one that ends with Shorty Getcha, Shorty Getcha, Shorty Getcha Eagle On, that verse turns her into a household name overnight. She wins the 2005 BET Award for Best Female Hip-Hop Artist. Suddenly, every major label in the country wants her. SRC approaches Fat Joe about giving her a solo album. And Remy, being Remy, demands complete creative control. This isn't just another project. This is her album. She flies to Miami, works with Scott Storch, comes up with Conceited. She teams up with Swizz Beatz for Whatever. She's picking beats, writing concepts, building songs from the ground up. And on February 7, 2006, which, and I cannot stress this enough, is the exact anniversary of Big Pun's death, 6 years to the day, she releases There's Something About Remy, based on a true story. Critics loved it. Fans loved it. But commercially? It debuted at number 33 on the Billboard 200. 37,000 copies in its first week. For most rappers, that would be respectable. For a rapper coming off Lean Back? Universal considered it a disappointment. And that is when the cracks started forming. Now let's get deep into the motive, because this is where everything clicks into place. And I need everyone listening to really understand something before we go further. In the 18 months between the release of There's Something About Remy in early 2006 and The Night at Pizza Bar in July 2007, Remy Ma's world had shifted in ways that most people on the outside never fully appreciated. Universal reportedly wasn't investing in promotion the way she felt they should. The relationship soured. She and the label eventually parted ways. And suddenly, a woman who had spent the previous 6 years being groomed by hip-hop royalty was independent, without major label backing, still expected to be Remy Ma, still expected to walk into every room like the Queen of New York, but without the machine behind her that had made all of that possible. That is a specific kind of pressure. That is a specific kind of grind. And it changes a person. Let's go back to her peak, because the contrast between then and now is absolutely staggering. During those lean back months, reports suggested she was pulling in serious money from touring, from features, from club appearances, from award show placements. She was one of maybe 3 or 4 female rappers in the entire industry commanding that kind of respect and that kind of check. And then, seemingly overnight, she was fighting for feature slots, running through independent circuits, and watching her label paperwork tie her up while newer artists ate off her sound. Observers of the industry have long noted that this kind of dramatic status shift creates specific psychological pressures that cannot be understated. When you have tasted the peak and you can still see it in the rearview mirror while your present is getting harder and harder, that is a powder keg. Now that alone does not excuse what happened. But it does explain the atmosphere she was walking into on July 13, 2007. Now contrast this with the world she was moving through. Nightclubs. Late nights. The meatpacking district. Cash flowing in and out of purses in an era before Venmo, before Cash App, before any digital paper trail. Everyone carrying real, physical money. Everyone drinking. Everyone in each other's pockets, sometimes literally. This was the environment. And into this environment walks a longtime friend of Remy's, a young woman named Makeda Barnes-Joseph, then 23 years old. According to reports, Remy and Makeda had known each other for years. They spent part of that evening together inside Pizza Bar. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed off. And then, allegedly, at some point that night, Remy noticed that $3,000 had gone missing from her purse. And this is where every single version of the story splits into pieces. The prosecution's version, as later argued in court, was that Remy became convinced Makeda had taken the money. She confronted her. The argument escalated. It moved outside the club. And there, on a Manhattan street, allegedly, Remy pulled out a handgun and fired a single shot into Makeda's abdomen. Witnesses reportedly described gunshots coming from Remy's Cadillac Escalade, which then fled the scene and was found abandoned in a car crash just 3 blocks away. Makeda, seriously wounded, survived and was rushed to the hospital. Remy's defense, on the other hand, presented a very different picture. Her legal team argued there was no direct physical evidence linking her to the shooting. The gun was reportedly never recovered. They questioned the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses. And Remy herself insisted for months that whatever happened that night was an accident. Her exact framing to media, according to reports, was that this was not a deliberate act. That she did not intend to harm her friend. Now let me tell you what the headlines won't, because that's where the real story lives. The $3,000 is not really about $3,000. Anyone who has ever lived in a tight-knit community understands this. When someone you trust, someone you have broken bread with, someone you have loved, allegedly steals from you, the amount is never the point. The betrayal is the point. And whether or not Makeda actually took that money, and to this day observers still debate it, the moment Remy believed she did, something snapped. And the industry pressure she was under, the label breakup, the constant grind to stay relevant, the loss of pun still sitting on her shoulders after all those years, all of that reportedly compressed into a single moment on a Manhattan sidewalk. And that moment cost Makeda Barnes-Joseph her physical safety, and it cost Remy Smith the next chapter of her career. The trial in early 2008 was a full media circus. One of the biggest female stars in hip-hop, facing the possibility of attempted murder. Makeda testified. She said Remy accused her of stealing, pulled out a handgun, and fired. She identified Remy as the shooter. And in March of 2008, the jury reached its verdict. Remy Ma was found guilty of assault, illegal weapon possession, and attempted coercion. She was acquitted of the attempted murder charge, an important legal distinction that observers have long noted actually mattered a lot, because it meant the jury did not believe she went out that night intending to kill anyone. But the remaining convictions still carried significant time. And a few months later, the judge handed down the sentence. 8 years. In a New York State prison. At 27 years old. But here's the part that genuinely hits different on every level, and I want everyone listening to slow down and actually sit with this. Because for hours and hours of coverage over the years, the conversation has always centered Remy. Remy's career. Remy's mugshot. Remy's sentence. Remy's comeback. And that is understandable, she is the famous one. She is the one whose name sells clicks. But there is another human being at the center of this entire story who almost never gets talked about, and whose life was permanently altered on that same Manhattan sidewalk. Makeda Barnes-Joseph. A 23-year-old woman who, according to every available account, went out that night to have a normal evening with a friend she trusted. She did not go out to become a footnote in someone else's Wikipedia page. She did not go out to become the answer to a hip-hop trivia question. She went out to enjoy her life. And she got shot in the stomach. Strip away all the celebrity names and focus on the fundamental human experience for one moment. Imagine a young woman allegedly accused of stealing money she may or may not have taken, being confronted by someone she considered a friend, and then being struck by a bullet fired at close range on a public street. Imagine the fear response in that moment. The confusion. The disbelief. The pain. Imagine being transported to a hospital, not knowing if you're going to live or die, and knowing that the person who allegedly did this to you is someone you knew, someone you laughed with, someone you had history with. That is a level of psychological trauma that does not go away when the physical wound heals. Trauma experts widely acknowledge that survivors of interpersonal gun violence often carry lifelong impacts, hypervigilance, anxiety, difficulty trusting people, sleep disturbances, and profound shifts in how they move through the world. This is somebody's daughter. This is somebody's family member. This is a real person who had to spend years afterward putting her life back together in a way that the general public will never fully see or understand because she was not the famous one. She did not have the machinery of a record label or the loyalty of fans to soften the aftermath. She had to be a regular civilian trying to heal from something extraordinarily violent, and she had to do it while the entire hip-hop internet was arguing about whether Remy Ma was going to be able to come back and drop another album. That imbalance is the human cost of celebrity culture that we, as consumers of gossip and drama, almost never sit with. And I want to sit with it right now, for a full 60 seconds, because Makeda Barnes-Joseph deserves that much respect in a story that has almost never centered her. And what makes it even heavier is that this kind of violence, allegedly triggered by a dispute over $3,000, ripples outward far beyond the two women involved. It ripples into Makeda's family, who had to get that phone call in the middle of the night telling them their daughter had been shot. It ripples into her friends, who suddenly had to reckon with the fact that a night out could end in an ambulance. It ripples into a community that had to process the fact that a beloved hip-hop figure was allegedly the person who caused it. And it ripples into every single young woman who looked up to Remy Ma as a role model and had to reconcile the artist they admired with the allegations they were reading in the news. There are no clean victims and villains in stories like this. There are only human beings, and consequences, and lifetimes of aftermath. Now, one detail that got weaponized as a punchline in tabloid coverage but genuinely deserves a more serious look: the wedding that was supposed to happen behind bars. Papoose, the Brooklyn rapper who had been in a relationship with Remy before her incarceration, attempted to marry her while she was locked up. Reports indicate the ceremony was called off after corrections officers discovered he had allegedly attempted to bring a universal handcuff key into the facility, which resulted in him being banned from visiting her for several months. Now, on one hand, the tabloids ran with it because it sounded like a scene from a heist movie. On the other hand, if you actually think about what that reportedly represented, a man risking a federal criminal charge and permanent separation from his fiancée because he refused to let her sit in that place alone, that is a devastating portrait of what love looks like under the worst possible circumstances. Whether the alleged key incident was a genuine escape attempt, a symbolic gesture, or something in between, the point remains: this relationship somehow survived one of the most brutal separations a couple can experience. And they eventually did get married for real. Now let's examine the aftermath and the comeback, because this raises serious questions about second chances, accountability, and the strange redemption arcs the music industry is willing to grant certain artists and not others. On August 1, 2014, after serving approximately 6 years of her 8-year sentence, Remy Ma walked out of Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. Fans reportedly gathered outside. Cameras were rolling. And for the first time since 2008, she was a free woman. Now, in almost every previous case in music history where a major artist has served this kind of extended sentence at the peak of their career, the outcome is grim. The industry moves on. The audience moves on. Sounds change. Trends shift. 6 years in a genre as fast-moving as hip-hop might as well be a lifetime. And most artists in that situation reportedly never recover their momentum. Remy did. She immediately got back in the studio. She married Papoose without interruption this time. And in 2016, in what many observers still consider one of the most improbable comebacks in modern rap history, she reunited with Fat Joe for their collaborative project Plata o Plomo, and the single All the Way Up became a full-blown cultural moment. The record hit the top 30 of the Billboard Hot 100. It earned multiple Grammy nominations. It was in every club, every radio station, every playlist. 10 years after her last major hit and less than 2 years after walking out of prison, Remy Ma was back on the biggest stage in music. Now legal experts and industry analysts have long debated why certain artists get this kind of runway back and others do not, and the honest answer is complicated. It has to do with talent, timing, allies still standing, Fat Joe never left her side, the perceived narrative arc of redemption versus recklessness, and the willingness of the audience to root for a comeback story. Then in 2017, she once again dominated hip-hop headlines, but this time not for a criminal case, for a diss record. Her highly publicized feud with Nicki Minaj produced SH Ether, a 7-minute lyrical assault built over the beat of Nas's legendary Ether, and whether you agreed with the record, whether you thought it was too much, whether you thought it was legendary, one thing was undeniable. Remy Ma could still rap. The pen never left her. 6 years in a cell did not dull it. 8 years of legal chaos did not dull it. The girl who spit 24 bars in Big Pun's apartment at 17 years old was still in there, still hungry, still writing every syllable herself. And that alone is the reason the comeback worked. The comeback was not a media invention. It was earned in blood, in bars, and in the fact that when the beat dropped, she still delivered. But we have to be honest about the shadow side of this comeback narrative too. Because the celebration of Remy Ma's return does raise legitimate questions that observers in the culture have raised for years. What does it mean when we, as a society, are quicker to embrace the redemption of a famous shooter than we are to remember the victim of the shooting? What does it mean when the same industry that promotes all the way up barely acknowledges the human being who was struck in the abdomen with a bullet? These are not comfortable questions, and I am not here to give anyone comfortable answers. But if we're going to have honest conversations about celebrity culture and accountability, we have to hold multiple truths at once. Remy Ma is a phenomenally gifted artist. She served her time as determined by the legal system. She has, by many accounts, worked to rebuild her life, and Makeda Barnes-Joseph is a human being whose life was allegedly altered by violence and who deserves to not be a punchline in a comeback story. The internet response to this story, both in 2007 and every time it resurfaces today, has been absolutely massive and deeply divided. On Twitter and hip-hop forums going back nearly 2 decades, reactions have ranged from complete sympathy for Remy, framing her as a Bronx kid who got caught in a moment she can never take back, to total condemnation, with observers arguing that no amount of hip-hop pedigree excuses shooting a friend over $3,000. On Instagram, particularly in fan pages dedicated to golden-era female MCs, comment sections still debate whether Remy's post-prison work has been enough to fully atone, or whether the culture has moved on too quickly from the actual victim. On TikTok, younger fans discovering Lean Back and All the Way Up for the first time are often stunned to learn the backstory, with many creators putting together explainer videos that reintroduce the case to Gen Z audiences who had no idea. Reddit threads and hip-hop subs go especially deep, with users pulling old court documents, dissecting trial testimony, and arguing endlessly about the physical evidence and the missing gun. One particularly insightful angle that keeps resurfacing in community discussion is the observation that Remy Ma's story is one of the clearest case studies of how the loss of a mentor can shape an entire career trajectory. Multiple observers over the years have pointed out that if Big Pun had lived, if he had been there in 2006 when the label relationship soured, if he had been in Remy's corner during that transitional period, the entire chain of events leading to Pizza Bar might have unfolded differently. Now that is speculation, obviously. Nobody can rewind history. But the point observers make is that Remy lost her North Star at 19 years old and had to navigate one of the most cutthroat industries in the world essentially on her own, with Fat Joe doing his best to fill the gap but never able to fully replace what Pun represented. That is a variable that almost never gets discussed in the hot take version of this story. The debate essentially breaks down into several camps that have not moved much in 20 years. Camp 1 is the accident believers, who take Remy at her word that whatever happened that night was not intentional. Camp 2 is that she did the crime, she did the time camp, who feel that 8 years, of which she served roughly 6, was proportionate and that she has earned the right to move on. Camp 3 is the victim-centered camp, which argues that the entire cultural conversation around this case has been unfairly skewed toward Remy's story and away from Makeda's. And Camp 4, the smallest but loudest, are the people who still argue that had Remy not been a woman in hip-hop, and had the media narrative not become so entangled with her post-prison comeback, the conversation would look very different today. All 4 camps are still active in comment sections in 2026, which tells you just how much emotional real estate this case still occupies in the culture. So after examining every angle of this incredibly complex situation, from the honor student in Castle Hill to the 17-year-old rapping in Big Pun's apartment, from the lean back era to the disappointing album sales, from the pizza bar confrontation to the 8-year sentence, from Bedford Hills to Bedford-Stuyvesant, from SH Ether back to Grammy stages, what we are really looking at is one of the most complicated, most human, most cautionary and most inspiring stories in modern hip-hop, all wrapped into one woman. Remy Ma is not a villain. Remy Ma is not a hero. Remy Ma is not a comeback poster child, and she is not a fallen star. She is all of those things at the same time, and pretending otherwise flattens a story that deserves the full weight of its complexity. Because $3,000 did not just change her life. It changed the life of everyone who loved her, everyone who followed her career, and most importantly, the life of a young woman named Makeda Barnes-Joseph who did not sign up for any of this. The larger questions this raises about celebrity accountability, about second chances, about victims who get lost in the redemption narratives of their attackers, about the impossible pressures placed on female MCs in the mid-2000s, about the way grief for a mentor can shape decades of decision-making. These are not questions that get answered in one script or in one video. These are questions the culture is still wrestling with, and honestly should keep wrestling with, Because the moment we stop asking them is the moment we stop learning from stories like this one. And now let me tell you what the headlines won't, because that's where the real story lives. The real story is that Remy Ma's arc, top to bottom, is a mirror. It shows us who we are as an audience. It shows us what we forgive, what we forget, what we celebrate, and what we conveniently ignore. And every single person listening to this has to decide for themselves what they think about all of it. So I want to hear from you in the comments, and I mean actually hear from you, not just a heart emoji. Do you think Remy Ma has genuinely earned her second chance? Do you think 8 years was the right sentence for what happened that night? Do you think Makeda Barnes-Joseph has received the acknowledgement she deserves in how this case is remembered? Do you think Big Pun's death fundamentally altered the trajectory of Remy's life, and if he had lived, would we even be having this conversation today? Drop your take. Even if you completely disagree with me, drop it. This community thrives on real conversation, not echo chambers. And if you made it this far through the most comprehensive, most human, most balanced deep dive on the Remy Ma story anywhere on this platform, show some love. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you want this level of depth on every major hip-hop story. And turn on notifications, because this story is not over. Remy is still active, still releasing music, still making headlines, and I will be here breaking every single development down as it happens. I appreciate every single one of you for rocking with me through this deep dive. Stay safe out there, think critically about every headline you consume and every mugshot you share. Remember that behind every viral hip-hop moment there is a real human being on both sides of the story, and remember, the headlines will always tell you what happened. It takes real time to understand why. I'll see you in the next one.